Kristi Wells is a CEO and co-founder of the Safe House Project. Safe House Project's mission is to unite communities and end domestic sex trafficking and restore hope, freedom, and a future to every survivor. Thanks for tuning in.
I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried. Will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Kristi Wells, thank you so much for coming on Mental Health News Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
And a big shout out to Mitzi Purdue for hooking us up.
She's one of my favorite people. She's quite the connector.
Yes, she is, very much so. Tell our listeners a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I'm the CEO of Safe House Project, which is a national organization that works in the fight against child sex trafficking. I am a 19-year wife of a Navy pilot. I am a mama of 3 vivacious kiddos, including twin boys that are going to be 10 this week. And I am an ardent defender of the vulnerable.
Love it. Twin boys. My gosh. That's a lot of work.
It is. They're actually easier now than they were when they were babies.
Yeah.
That was traumatizing, but now they're super fun.
You can reason with them now better than maybe before.
I can.
Well, tell us a little bit about Safe House Project and how you came to be the CEO of the organization.
Sure. I had the deep honor of not only being the CEO, but one of 2 co-founders. We began this organization back in 2018 in response to we were helping build up a safe house in South Africa. Mm-hmm. I had seen sex trafficking internationally in Costa Rica when I was about 16 years old. And a friend of mine had gone to South Africa. He saw a need to build up a safe house to protect girls that were at risk of trafficking in Soshanguve, South Africa. He was a hip hop artist. He came back from that trip heart on fire. He gathered some friends also in the Christian hip hop music industry, and they produced an album to raise money for this safe house. And I jumped in to run the PR for that. And as people started hearing about the album, started hearing about what we were doing, they started saying, that's great, but what are you going to do domestically? I didn't have an answer for that. I didn't understand the domestic landscape. And Brittany Dunn, my co-founder, she had seen it internationally as well, but had also understood a little bit more domestically. And so we really became students of the industry to understand what the problem was. And once we understood that there were 300,000 American kids being trafficked for sex in America, according to the Department of Justice in 2017, And 1% of those kids was ever being identified or rescued. And that 80% of that 1% was ending up back in traffickers' hands because there wasn't a safe place to go. And there were only 100 beds in restorative care homes. We saw the issue in a new light. We saw hundreds of thousands of American kids with no place to go and ending up back in that cycle of victimization. And so from there, really, Brittany and I birthed the Safe mission to increase survivor identification above 1% through true education, and increase the number of restorative care homes for survivors to really receive this help that they need on their path to healing. And that's anywhere from emergency homes to long-term homes to transitional homes. We want to see survivors served not just at one point, but along that healing journey.
How much have you seen? What do the numbers look like since the pandemic?
Substantial. So we have seen about a 40% increase in calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline for help, for assistance. Oh. Anecdotally, we have seen about a 20% increase in familial trafficking. So 40% of child sex trafficking in America is done by a family member. So when we say child sex trafficking, we are not talking about, throwing a kid in the back of the car and moving them across state lines or taking them down to Mexico. We are talking about the commercial sexual exploitation of a child through either prostitution or pornography. It's a child being sold for sex. And when the pandemic happened and shelter in place happened, we saw families who couldn't afford anything. Already in vulnerable positions. And you see a parent with no ability to pay rent,
right?
And a creepy landlord who says, "I'll make you a deal. You give me your 12-year-old or your 13-year-old, and we'll call it good," or even younger, and we'll call it good for the month. And so we've seen anecdotally about a 20% increase in familial trafficking across the nation. A 93% increase. I was hearing this today, some data coming out of New Mexico, 93% increase in predatory behaviors online, because when the kids all went online in unsupervised time and parents are distracted by the news or by trying to figure out how to put food on the table, predators came out in droves going after kids in the online space, promising, finding that vulnerability and exploiting that and promising to be the person that's going to provide them food, shelter, clothing, protection when their families couldn't protect them, to promise love when these kids are trying to figure out what's happening in their world, what's happening in our world. And so they begin those grooming scenarios. And we have seen, if you look at the reports, it looks like the reports of runaways has increased. Right. It's being misclassified. It's not runaways. It's children who are being lured by predators online to leave. So then law enforcement classifies it as runaways. They don't go look for them quite like they would.
Interesting.
If a child was taken. And so they get these girls to leave and they continue grooming them, sometimes for another couple of months, couple of weeks, believing that they are the answer to their problem, that they're going to fulfill on all the promises that they've made. And then they flip the switch. And that's when they begin selling them. And by that point, it's too late, or not too late, but the girl is so completely trapped in a trauma bond and she doesn't know how to get out. And she believes it's her fault.
Right. Exactly. I think there was one thing that I thought about, what a lot of people don't understand, that grooming process, the trauma bond process, Stockholm syndrome, if they had the chance to get away, why didn't they, or why did they go back? I don't think a lot of people understand what that really is and why they would go back or why they would not run. Can you talk a little bit about, what goes on in the psychology of a child as that's happening?
Sure. So it varies. So a couple of different things on trauma bond when a child is being trafficked by a family member. It is truly everything that, not everything, but it is that parent relationship. That child innately believes that that person is there to protect them. And when that person who's there to protect them also sells them and then says, this is what we have to do, those kids don't even know that what's happening to them is wrong.
Yeah.
And so getting them to leave their trafficking situation is to recognize that their entire family foundation is built on sand. And it takes somebody showing them a healthy relationship for them to even recognize that what is happening to them is not okay. So that's one piece of it. But when you deal with those who have been really groomed by, I'll say, a boyfriend or, an outside family relative or something like that, they firmly believe that this person loves them. The traffickers who are grooming them build that really strong bond. This, I get you, I see you, I'm going to be the one to answer all of your problems. And then they flip the switch and they continually bounce back and forth between love and hatred.
Right.
They're bathed in love and affection, and then they're bathed in abuse, and they don't know which person they're going to get that day. But by that point, the trafficker has them so isolated that they don't know that they're in an unhealthy relationship. They don't know that they're isolated. They don't know that what's happening to them is wrong. And the traffickers will tell them, I'm the only person who gets you. And if you leave, nobody else will love you.
Yeah.
You've got somebody with complex PTSD who comes out of a trafficking situation and their first engagement with somebody, that person didn't get them. That person has no clue what's going on. They can't figure out why they have a heightened response to a normal circumstance. And the individual thinks they're right. Nobody gets me.
Can we break down what trafficked means? Because I've also had people say, oh, okay, so that's if they take them in a car or on a plane or on a train. Some movement is involved in that respect for it to count as trafficking. So can you break, because I don't see it that way, but I could be wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. According to the Department of Justice, trafficking is the commercial sexual or sex trafficking. We'll qualify sex trafficking, the commercial sexual exploitation of an individual through force, fraud, or coercion. However, if a child is being used for commercial sex, including prostitution or pornography. So if a child is being sold for sex acts or sex acts are happening to them and it's being recorded and distributed as pornography, that is sex trafficking.
Okay.
And so it does not mean moving a child. It doesn't mean moving somebody across state lines. I lived in San Diego, California for a little bit, and people kept saying, oh, sex trafficking, aren't you afraid somebody's going to grab your kid and run across the border?
Right. See?
And the answer is no, because that's not sex trafficking. What I'm worried about is the kids in my neighborhood that might be coming from homes that a parent could be abusing them and recording it and distributing it as pornography. Those are the things that I worry about. But a child being used, there are some states that do not qualify a child being sold for sex that they perceive to be a willing participant as a child trafficking victim. Some states will still throw a 14-year-old in jail for prostitution.
Wow.
I promise you there is an adult on the other side of that child making the decisions for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And I always think about this too, because I experienced the beginnings of this with my biological father, and the neighborhood we were in, this was going on all over the place. But what's interesting to me is when I would go speak at some conference about this topic or others, and someone would say, oh, underground. There's a lot of use of the word underground, the seedy, whatever. And I thought, I understand why that nomenclature is being used. However, it makes it seem like it's in some other place. It's not your neighbor next door. because people don't associate, they think some underground thing means something completely different. And I always thought, I want to get rid of that word because I get how it's being used. But like we've just talked about, this could literally be happening, 3 houses down from someone, or in an apartment complex in the bottom floor apartment, and you're on the second floor and you don't really know what's going on, but you think it's kind of weird that there's always kids way too young coming in and out of this apartment or home.
Absolutely. There's a lot of misconceptions out there, and that is why victim identification is only at 1%, is because you see the Hollywood version of it, of a child essentially in shackles in a basement.
Right.
And people, or you see Liam Neeson's movie Taken, and people go, there's no way there's 300,000 kids being trafficked, because if there was, you would be hearing about it. Well, no, because what's happening is that child sexual abuse has always existed.
Yeah.
But now it's being monetized. A parent who is sexually abusing a child then decides, you know what? Right. We have a survivor, Rhea Story, that we work with, that is amazing. But her story, she was sexually abused by her father, with her mom in the home and her brother. He would sell her to other people. He would beat her black and blue with a riding crop. And then he would sell her to other men for her to have sex with them and him watch. And then he would switch places. He would take her back behind a theme park in back alleys and sell her. And she was homeschooled. She was involved in church activities.
Right.
She was an American sex slave hiding in plain sight. The other one that we work with is a gal on staff with us. She was trafficked from the age of 6 to 11 by her uncle. Her aunt was on the school board. Her uncle was a business owner. Parents lived, normal lives, normal jobs. And she, was involved in church activities. She was involved in youth group, all of those different things. And nobody ever saw it. We've seen teens trafficking their peers. 1 in 5 kids right now is sexting.
Yeah.
And 2 out of 3 of those kids will experience sextortion by the age of 16. And so you look at those numbers and how prevalent that is. There's pictures that float around of a kid, and then they are told by a peer, look, you don't want these pictures to go viral? Then I've got things you have to do.
Right, exactly. Tell us a little bit about how you can clear or mute an entire dining room full of your neighbors when you join the conversation.
Oh boy. I've mentioned that a few times since you and I talked last week.
I know we talked about it when we talked, and I'm like, girl, I am right there with you. I have made people like drop their fork and then thought, oh, it's very silent.
Was that an inappropriate comment to make? I probably shouldn't have said that.
Right.
I mean, I will say, you probably get I don't even want to say desensitized, but things that are not normal become unfortunately normal,
right,
in this line of work. And I'm sure in your line of work, where you see things and it's what you're surrounded by day in, day out. I actually, believe it or not, I almost cleared a room. I at least silenced a whole room of peers in the anti-trafficking industry a few nights ago, because we deal a significant amount with survivors that were trafficked through satanic ritual abuse. Talk about clearing a room.
Right.
And they all look at me and said, Kristi, we don't ever deal with that. And I'm like, you don't? We deal with that all the time. So I start talking through what these survivors have gone through, and they're just horrified.
Yeah.
And the fact is, we deal with the dark parts of the world, the underbelly of society, and the things that nobody wants to see are there. And that's not at any fault of theirs. I didn't want to see it. Right. But once I saw it, it slapped me in the face and I could never unsee it. And so I have a very bad habit of shining a very bright light on the very dark parts of society, because I have a desperation for those who are trafficked to be seen. And I know that sometimes it involves sharing the uncomfortable things, and uncomfortable enough that people go, wait, what? And because when people hear sex trafficking, they think, not my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Not my country, not my state, not my kid's school. And I have friends, survivors who are dear friends that were trafficked in all of those exact situations, and they were desperate for somebody to see them. And so I kind of have no problem shocking people into silence, because you know what, if that means that I get one person to see it, then I've done my job. And I can tell you that we have so many people that we have horrified. But in those times, they call us back. I mean, they'll call us back 6 months later and go, oh my gosh, I missed it. Yeah. Or, oh my gosh, my niece, a gal who's been friends with the Safe House Project team since we began in 2017, had an incident recently that her niece was talking online to an older boy, and she kept thinking, something's not right. And she snuck out and she went to go meet him. Well, it wasn't an older boy. It was a man who had completely ill intent, and they intercepted her right before he did. The police intercepted her right before they did. And so there are people that say, I wish I didn't know anything about what you do. But you know what? I did, and I saved a life. And so because of that, I'm kind of ruthless at dinner parties.
Exactly. So. Yeah, I am too. I keep talking. I keep blathering on, but I notice, much more quickly, I see some people twitching in their seats. They're very uncomfortable. But yeah, I mean, these are conversations that need to be had, because again, underground, all of those things make it seem like it's not, like it's not real. And the reality is it's very real. I love the fact that we can have these kinds of conversations today, because when I first started talking about things like incest, it was like 1980s. That was not a time when you talked about this kind of things. So.
Right. But I always say, I feel like my job is to be the next Susan G. Komen. Not comparing myself to her. She was Nancy, her sister, was who started Susan G. Komen, is a powerhouse. But what she did was she took an issue that nobody wanted to talk about, nobody wanted to address. The New York Times wouldn't let these articles run about breast cancer, and now because of her, the NFL turns pink.
Yeah.
And that is, she took an issue that nobody wanted to see and made them see it, until the point that the survivors of breast cancer are now celebrated. We want to see survivors of sex trafficking celebrated in the same way that the women are who marched down the street with Susan G. Komen race.
Right, exactly. Well, can you give us, as my last question, can you give us some background or information about what Safe House Project does in terms of education and so on?
Sure. So we operate in really three key areas. One is increasing victim identification through education. So if you are listening to this, please go on to iamonwatch.org and take the free 1-hour training. You can break it up into bite-sized chunks. You can do one module. They're 10 5-minute modules, so you can do one module at a time. It is a survivor-informed training platform to help you understand how to spot, report, and prevent trafficking where you live, work, and play. So please take the training, understand how you can be the eyes and ears of your community. Our organization also does training with law enforcement, with military. We get to train corporations on how to really disrupt the demand. So we trained 6,000 law enforcement, military, first responders. We've trained 12,000 community members just this last 4 months on how to spot, report, and prevent trafficking. We've deployed training to 160,000 business leaders on how to disrupt the demand. So prevention and education is one piece. Survivor empowerment is the other. We work to serve survivors through rescue and placement, emergency placement into restorative care programs. So we served probably 50 survivors last year, about 147 American survivors that we have served in our last couple of years. We have survivors that we mentor that are on staff with us. That is part of our economic empowerment for survivors. Right. But more than anything, we help build safe houses. When we began, there were only 100 beds in restorative care homes across America. We have increased that by 124%.
Good for you. And this is the process of, just imagine, listeners, what the amount of deprogramming that someone has to go through, and all of the trauma and everything in order to feel safe. You cannot do that obviously in that same environment. So providing a space where you can go through all of the stages with people that understand, it's tremendous.
Absolutely. And that's where we really get to see lives transformed, is when survivors have opportunities to heal, and people that say, I see you and I'm going to do everything in my power to make it better. That is one of the most unbelievable things to see.
Absolutely. Well, Kristi, I'm so glad you do what you do. Please share with our listeners where they can find out more about your organization.
Absolutely. You can check out more at safehouseproject.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here.
And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio. Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to PROZE.com and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstrespondermentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissistabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristin Sananta-Walker, and thank you for listening.
And I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.